This is the engine that I took out of the car. Didn't take me that long, a couple of hours I guess. If I knew what I was doing, it would have taken me less time. I didn't really do anything to the engine. I had to cut one or two pipes. For the most part, I just disconnected wiring harnesses. I just pulled them out, and eventually the engine came out. So in the back, one of the things about the kit is that it has to match up with the transmission that I had. So the kit manufacturer, Canadian Electric Vehicles, they needed to know what the bolt pattern was for, like, here's a centering pin here to connect to the transmission. So the flywheel used to be here, and the flywheel is still in the vehicle. The flywheel is connected to the transmission just like it used to be. One of the interesting things about this particular engine is this is a V6, but it's based on the block, the engine block, which is the main body of the engine. The casting that they used to make this engine is the same casting that they used to make a V8 engine, but then they just almost literally cut a couple of cylinders off of it. And that's a perfectly valid way to make an engine design, a smaller engine design. But in this particular case, it had the result that this engine has a wobble in it, or a shake, or a vibration. So the flywheel that was on the engine is out of balance, or it was out of balance. That's intentional, because if the flywheel has a shake in it, and the engine has a shake in it, and they shake it in opposite harmonics, then it makes for a smooth running engine in the end. But when I took that flywheel off of this motor, off of this gas engine, and I put it onto a perfectly smooth electric motor, it shook like crazy. It was just undrivable. It shook so badly. So I sent the flywheel out to an engine balancing company and told them my problem, and they just drilled some holes in it to remove some of the weight of the flywheel, and now it runs smoothly. Not much else to say about the gas engine, except that it's here now instead of in my car. But I do want to cover a bit about efficiency. Quite often, car companies talk about how they're building more and more efficient vehicles. Personally, that kind of grates on my nerves, calling these new cars more efficient. They're not more efficient. They're simply lighter, smaller, and able to go further on the same amount of gas because they weigh less. They're not getting more energy out of the gasoline. This engine is about 30% efficient. All gasoline engines are about 30% efficient. Diesel engines are a little bit more efficient. So for every pound or every gallon of gasoline or diesel fuel you put in, 70% of that energy goes right out the back of the car. And I want to cover why. Let me show you something. So I wanted you to see this. This is the radiator that used to be in my car. I've heard so many times people saying that the engines are 70 or 30% efficient. Most of the energy goes out your tailpipe. That always grated on my nerves. Most of the energy doesn't go out your tailpipe. It goes out your radiator. Imagine this thing. We're driving down the road at 60 miles an hour. We're pouring nearly boiling hot water in one end and getting cooler water out the other end. The only reason this exists in an engine, in a car, is to blow off massive amounts of energy. Imagine if you could capture the energy coming off of that radiator and use it to heat your home. Do you believe for a second that an engine like this makes enough heat to heat a house? Personally, I believe it does. We blow so much energy, so much air, pulling so much energy out of these engines because they are fundamentally inefficient. The various engine manufacturers have done a good job with the basic technology, but gasoline engines simply cannot be more efficient. They've done everything they can to squeeze every bit of energy out of every drop of gasoline. And the best they've ever come up with is 30%. An electric vehicle is the other way around. An electric vehicle is nearly 100% efficient. Now it isn't 100%, but it's very close. It's approaching 100%. And the proof of that is that there's no radiator. There's no energy being vented off. Nearly every scrap of electricity I put into my car ends up turning the wheels to make me go down the road. 70% of the gasoline I put into this thing got blown out the back of the car through my radiator. So even if I drove my electric vehicle, charging it up with electricity manufactured by a coal-fired power plant, I would still produce far less CO2 than I do, or than I would if I was running a gasoline engine. So even a coal-fired power plant can make my car less environmentally bad, or more efficient, if you will, or less polluting than this gasoline engine. So why the car companies aren't making electric cars is simply beyond me. They're massively efficient. They're of enormous benefit to the environment because they don't produce any CO2. I live in British Columbia. In British Columbia, the vast majority of our electricity comes from hydro dams. You can argue about hydro dams. I understand the argument. But the point here is CO2. Hydro dams don't produce any CO2. I get my power from a hydro dam. Therefore, my car produces no CO2 of any measurable amount. Even if I lived in the middle of, I don't know, take for example Kansas or Wyoming, not that I know, but let's just assume that they've got nothing but coal-fired power plants. My car would still produce less CO2 in the operation of my vehicle than it would if I filled it up with gasoline. And that's an enormous factor. That's stuff we need to think about. As I've explained, if I was running with lithium-ion batteries, I'd get even greater range. Now you're getting to the point where you're producing true zero-emission vehicles. So I want to cover, why did we call this documentary Global Myths? What's the point, Global Myths? I mean, I'm talking about an electric car. I've shown you the electric car. I've shown you that a guy like me, who's not a garage mechanic, who in his driveway can convert a vehicle into an electric vehicle. I buy a kit off the shelf, they ship it here, I unwrap it, and I put in the stuff. I've never done this before. This is the first engine I've ever removed from a car. I do know engines, I'm not going to deny that, but I didn't take anything apart, I didn't disassemble it, I just undid a bunch of bolts until it fell out. These are so easy to convert. If I can do it, anybody can do it. And if there's one message I want to get across, it's that. There's nothing special about what I did. It's easy. The kit's all there. Anybody can do this. It's just not hard. The effect of electric vehicles is so profound, I'm bewildered why we're not doing this en masse. They're so easy, anybody can do them. The effect on the environment is profound. The effect on the economy. These things will not break, by the way. And that's another point I wanted to make. So why did we call it Global Myths? Back to my point. Why did we call this documentary Global Myths when I showed you a vehicle that's not a myth? The answer is, the myth that I'm trying to dispel is that car companies continue to talk about any kind of vehicle except for electric vehicles. They talk about hybrids, they talk about hydrogen-powered cars, they talk about plug-in hybrids, they talk about all these different technologies, but they won't talk about the one technology that is proven, it's sitting right there and it works, is effective and is zero emission, and that's electric vehicles, and they need to start talking about them. In fact, I'm going to go get a document. I want you to see this.